All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Sandra Maignant. I'm the co-lead of the CAAFAG task force and also working with Plan International. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar today. Today, we're going to talk about online recruitment of children into armed groups. We're going to look at the new trends, the legal implications, and also some prevention strategies. So today we're going to talk about online recruitment. This is a phenomenon that we see more and more in many contexts. We see how armed groups are using digital platforms, social media to groom and recruit children into their ranks. And today we have four experts who will join us to share their knowledge and their expertise on this subject. We're very pleased to welcome Galen Lamphere Englund, who works for the EGRN, Ottavia Galuzzi, who works for UNICRI, Vanessa Murphy with the ICRC, and Kristin Skoberne with the Office of the OSRSG CAAC. So we'll take a bit more time to introduce you to these experts. Each of them have a wealth of knowledge. They've worked on reports. They've done some research on the subject that we're very pleased to share with you today. So without any further ado, I will introduce Galen Lamphere Englund, who is a senior counterterrorism and conflict prevention advisor. He's also the co-founder of the Extremist and Gaming Research Network. He is the author of a paper on working on protecting children in online gaming that is done with UNICEF. And we will share the link with you in the chat if you're interested to know more about his work. Galen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sandra, and thank you for the very kind invitation to present to the working group today. As Sandra said, my name is Galen. I've been working on questions of violence and conflict for about 15 years, and for the last decade, I've really been focused on questions of online exploitation by a range of actors, most of which has been focused on violent extremist and terrorist actors, but I've also done a lot of work on non-state armed groups, as well as a range of others. And I think that's linked to Ottavia's research on similar ideas, which is also amazing, but not a link to my piece on this. I have done some wonderful work with other UN colleagues over the years, but a lot of my work has been through the Extremism and Gaming Research Network, which we started back in 2019. We're now over 170 folks globally looking at the exploitation of gaming surfaces and platforms by a range of malign communities. I also work for the Christchurch Call Foundation most of the time these days, where I build practical solutions to some of these problems alongside a really lovely team. It's my pleasure to give you a bit of background on gaming and some of the potential harms we see as being present therein. Few footnotes on gaming to get us started, to set the scene. Gaming is enormous these days. I hope if you're on this call, you're relatively aware of that. But we're looking at revenue figures in the ballpark of $200 million a year for 2025. That's about another 10 billion more than the year before, and is more revenue than music, film, and TV put together. There's also about half of all of humanity who plays some form of video game on a regular basis. So that's about 3.42 billion people globally, even more if you take into account non-standard video games. And when we think about children in particular, around 90% of children who are living in countries with widespread device and internet access play video games on a regular basis. Gamers are growing. There's a lot of us these days, and there's more all the time. That's around 6.6% growth year on year. And that's fastest growing in the Middle East and North Africa. I'm very fond of saying that the next billion gamers will be African, which is very, very exciting for a whole number of reasons. Gaming is also great. There's a lot of pro-social benefits, community building. People turn to games to find identity, belonging, joy, resilience in hard moments. And I also like to emphasize, if you come away with nothing else from today's conversation, that modern multiplayer gaming communities and the different platforms around them function as social ecosystems. They are hyper interactive. They are phenomenally powerful to build connection through. We find in terms of research that the connections made through video games, when played together, are much stronger, much faster, and have longer impact on people's lives than those made through traditional social media. And lastly, I always like to say and remind folks that depictions of violence in video games are not definitively connected to offline violence, far from it. Over 20 years of research has shown over and over again that violence in video games, at least for the vast majority of cases, is not connected to offline violence. I will talk through some ways in which games are used to propagandize by groups, some ways in which specifically targeted violence and ethnic violence, for example, is used to dehumanize and is used to target individuals. But rather, like movies, the violence itself is not the issue. It is the framing around that. It is the ends to which it is applied and the specific targeting that might be used. So let's get into what recruitment can look like. I often talk about hybrid ecosystems of violence online these days. Many of you are coming from child protection backgrounds. So this will likely be of no surprise to you. But in online spaces, we're seeing an increased confluence between sexual and gender-based violence, between CSEA or CSAM concerns, and other forms of tech-facilitated abuse, be that of a violent misogynistic nature, a violent extremist nature, or from non-state armed groups, or from gangs. That tends to come together alongside things like ultra-gore content, true crime content, school massacre content, and when we look into the backgrounds of individuals who go on to join organized or semi-organized violent groups, they've often been exposed to a whole host of these harms simultaneously in an ecosystem that seems to normalize overall settings of violence. So it's not just a game per se, it's the wider social ecosystem around it, which creates a normalizing setting inside which the norms of violence can shift for the individuals. We found in polling with EGRN and the Royal United Service Institute that around 33% of gamers at the moment are exposed to violent extremism, with around 75% witnessing harassment on basis of one's individual protected characteristics on a regular basis. When we dive into matters of exploitation, I know we're talking about recruitment today, but we also see most cases of individuals socialized into violent groups who are younger tend to come through a range of broader social experiences rather than being targeted by an individual recruiter. Those occur through games and mods created by armed groups. There's also gaming cultural references, the use of mimetic warfare or mimetic propaganda. If you've been following a certain government's primary press account over the last 2 weeks, we've seen a lot of gamified propagandistic pieces. These are powerful because they are pop cultural, they cut through the noise, and they appeal to younger audiences. Games are often social spaces, right? There's in-game chats, there's voice chats, and in the platforms adjacent to them, like Roblox, like Discord, you'll have entire wider communication ecosystems, server-based, chat-based, voice-based. And then we go to the live streaming side, people watching others play games. We see video content being used to communicate. So lots of communication modalities. There's also the gamification of violence. The live streaming of attacks this weekend marked the 7th anniversary of the Christchurch massacre in New Zealand. That was a live streamed attack that was gamified, using gaming elements inside of it to maximize the impact of both the atrocity and the long tail of it. In the years since, we've seen around 21 separate attacks that have drawn influence from that horrific incident, and around 16 other attacks that have been averted. The long tail of gamified attacks is very poignant. There's also financing and money laundering concerns, a bit less relevant for this conversation, but one that we like to keep our eye on. I'll zoom in on one particular angle since we're talking about recruitment today. One scenario inside which we have seen a number of cases over the years is that armed group recruiters began covertly communicating and targeting new group members using in-game chat functions. They may also frequently use Roblox if you're trying to reach younger audiences. There is a neo-Nazi group called Patriotic Front, which has created Roblox Front, This is a Roblox server designed to target young individuals to join their armed group. We see gangs and cartels in Mexico doing a similar approach at the moment. You cannot see my presentation. Thank you for telling me. I am so sorry. There's been slides this whole time and none of you able to see them. That's embarrassing. Thank you for playing it in the chat. Hopefully you can now see slides. There's been some lovely slides before this too. Rather than just me going on a long tirade. I'm sure. Thank you for telling me. Right. Well, there's some slides for you. If we look at a model scenario inside of this, we have seen armed groups covertly targeting members inside of in-game chats or setting up their own servers to try and draw and recruit young users. A idealized funnel for this would go along the lines of having a bit, thanks, Afruz, I appreciate that. Having a bit of an in-game chat, you might drop a racist, misogynistic, or a hateful joke, see who laughs, strike up a conversation with that user by going into their private messages, you DM them, you would add them as a friend. I have a nice video where I talk through this. I'm skipping the video for time today. You would then have a nice chat with them in a one-to-one. You might then become their friend. You can friend people through a platform quite easily. Then you usually move out to another platform. You move from the game chat itself to something like Discord. The Discord server is not encrypted. It's semi-private. You might then help to bring someone into your way of thinking, much like armed groups do offline. You don't bring people right into the deep end. You bring them to the softer stuff first. So you would then try to gradually socialize someone into your group. You become their friend. With younger audiences, we often see parallels with grooming for CSEA. Isolation from wider social groups, befriending, sometimes giving gifts, and then, so in-game items, for example. And then you might also see an ask for a bid from the individual, doing something for the group. In white supremacist groups, this might be a skin color test, seeing if someone is who they say they are. In hybrid harm groups like the COM or 764, it might start with small bids to get someone engaged in the group, then moving to a more private, confidential space inside which we see increasing acts of self-harm being asked of the individual. Sexploitation often occurs along the same time within those COM network groups, different organizational tactics depending on the group, but inside of hybrid COM networks, we see self-harm being asked of individuals that then escalates. That may escalate to real-world violence. When we look at a few cases of this, we often see the recreation by individuals of an ideological persuasion who want to join an armed group, enacting their fantasies in gaming settings as a way to show their allegiance. Bottom right is a recreation in Roblox of an ISIS training camp by two individuals who are underage and arrested in Singapore. We've seen several cases of this over the last few years. Top left are also ISIS pledges that were done on Steam. Some of these are towing the line between are they joking, are they not? The trolling to belief nexus online is very difficult to probe at, but we do see genuine cases of this within law enforcement as well. So that gamification of recruitment tends to spill into offline violence. When I've done analysis of looking at substantive attacks that have resulted in loss of a life that involved either a heavy gaming component, i.e. the actual attack was live stream or gamified, or the perpetrator had a substantial nexus to gaming platforms or services in their socialization to violence. There have been 35 either terrorist, violent extremist, or adjacent attacks in the last just about 7 years, resulting in 173 killed and close to 400 injured. Many of these in the last several years have been school attacks that involve kind of a hybridized set of influences. 15 of these have been school attacks carried out by underage perpetrators. The youngest perpetrator on this list was age 13, with a mean age of 21. Many of the individuals here, their pathways to violence took several years, some a few months, some several years, but we're often looking at underage individuals involved in these incidents. A few things to point out on this little table. When I say TCC, and I'm referring to True Crime Community, this is a new set of online communities that have an obsession with actual criminal incidents, often mass atrocities, mass violence, or long-term criminal acts. About 10 of the attacks we've looked at had links to TCC communities. But again, all of these have a strong link to either gaming platforms and services or the act of violence itself was gamified. I write as a quote from the Bratislava attacker who shot up an LGBTQ bar in 2022, saying the live streamed view of the Christchurch attack was different. So he's referring to not his own attack, but one previously that influenced him. It felt like a video game-like view of the whole event, felt different to content that the perpetrator had seen before. This is because games are quite powerful psychologically. They help to break down cognitive inhibitions against violative content, and they're quite good at getting people to engage with things that otherwise they might be a bit adverse to. This all comes together. I was talking through the COM and 764 a bit before, but these are some of the most concerning hybrid threat actors that we see at present, targeting younger communities. I'm happy to go a lot more in depth on that, but I'm running short on time. So I will say in general, what can we do about it? I try to group things into three main categories: prevention, detection, and reaction. Prevention is building better online resilient communities, helping to engage with parents, educators, and young folks. Detection is finding the violative content or behaviors earlier on. AI can do a lot, but not everything. We still need good humans in the loop, and we need good local language data, especially in non-English or non-widely spoken languages. Low resource languages are a huge resource gap here. And then reacting, doing something after it's found. This often means dovetailing in with youth services or with pipelines for youth offenders who may simultaneously be both victims and perpetrators. I think that's very clear at many ages, but especially true for children. So there's a lot to be done in integrating better response mechanisms into offline protection systems that often are really not responsive to what's happening in gaming platforms. We're building a few of these solutions at the moment, including widespread awareness programs for caregivers and educators, community moderator trainings, law enforcement trainings, and lots of work with civil servant champions. If you're interested in knowing more about those, please do let me know. Across the EGRN, we've written about 170 pieces on this over the years, including a couple of very specific frameworks, the UNICEF framework being one most recently, but we have a whole host of others. So if you're interested in that learning library, please let me know. Happy to set you up more resources. There's quite a bit on this at the moment, and I'm glad to see it getting more attention. Anyway, thank you all so much for your time, and I'll pass it over to our other wonderful speakers. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Galen. This is a very insightful, very interesting. I think we all learn a lot. And we know, the time is too short to give justice to all the work that you've done. And so we dropped the link to the research in the chat if you want to know more about the work of Galen. So now I will welcome Ottavia Galuzzi. So Ottavia is an associate expert with UNICRI, which is the UN Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute. Apologies. Ottavia is the co-author of a paper on the exploitation of digital technologies and by non-state armed groups in Colombia. So now we're going to focus a bit more on one country, the context of Colombia, and see how armed groups are also using digital technologies to recruit children. Ottavia, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Sandra, and nice to meet you all and see you all. And no worries about our acronym. It's quite difficult to catch, and some of us still struggle to remember it. So we feel you. I will just quickly share my screen. I think that you can see it now. So before starting, just like a few words about UNICRI. So as Sandra said, we are one of the UN agency we are actually the only UN agency mandated to conduct research and training on topics related to crime prevention, criminal justice, and the rule of law. And we offer a comprehensive suite of technical tools from action-oriented research all the way to capacity building and academic training. So what I would like to talk to you about today is this small research and investigation we did into how non-state armed groups in Colombia exploit digital technologies. And this is part of our action-oriented research that we did last year. And we actually investigated into how right-wing and left-wing violent extremist groups exploit digital technologies in South America, Africa, and Asia. And while conducting this investigation, we encounter actually a lot of online content produced and disseminated by non-state armed groups in Colombia, particularly FARC-D, so the dissident factions of the FARC, as well as the ELN, the Ejército de Liberación Nacional. Apologies for my Spanish. And because these are non-state armed groups for the UN, we decided to cover these topics separately as one of the articles in UNICRI's magazine, Freedom from Fear. Just before sharing a few insights from this brief investigation, I would like to a quick disclaimer, meaning that I'm not a child protection expert and I'm not specifically, I don't specifically work on Colombia. I saw that many of you in the chat, you are from Colombia working there. So please correct me if I'm going to say anything wrong. At UNICRI, we have a global mandate. So we happen to work on this specifically in Colombia, but it's not my specific work. And what I will bring to you is more like an analytical perspective, considering that I'm an analyst in mostly on cybercrime and counterterrorism background. And also most of this investigation was done for this piece was done by my colleague Arthur Bradley, and we were very thankful for the fantastic expert we could interview that you can see in the piece. So, two starting points about what we found, and more broadly regarding children recruitment in Colombia, is that the true figures we saw, the true figures of this phenomenon are probably higher than government data. And this because we have seen that many families do not report their children being missing and most likely joining these armed groups because of the fear of reprisal. And the second point is that this, unfortunately, and I'm sure that all of you know this better than me, this is not a new topic, but it has become harder for law enforcement agencies and government agencies to counter due to the exploitation of technologies. But so how do these groups exploit digital technologies within the context of Colombia? So what we have seen through the investigation, but also in interviewing different experts, is that the really communication by these non-state armed groups and their members have moved from physical pamphlets, like paper pamphlets, to digital messaging, including in private encrypted spaces such as WhatsApp and Telegram. So we know there is a WhatsApp group managed by some of these non-state armed groups, but they are also present in more public digital spaces like TikTok, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. They also exploit static websites. You might wonder what's the matter about it. The problem with websites is that they are much harder to take down, and they offer quite a solid place to find information, and also with links to cloud services like Google Drive. So it's a useful place for these groups to share information about their activities and recruitment and propaganda. We have seen this group posting a lot of videos on multiple platforms simultaneously, and this is actually a technique quite used by other threat actors, and this helps them to maximize the digital lifespan of their content. And as mentioned at the beginning, this is quite easy content to find. So for instance, we did some searches for related keywords and hashtags on TikTok, and these reveal multiple accounts affiliated with dissident FARC groups. And these accounts are identifiable by the use of FARC logos or like FARC name, but also particular emojis, including the green leaf, that expert told us signify the coca plant, often combined with ninja emoji, Colombian flag, and what's problematic, and here we connect with the recruitment of children, is that these accounts typically promote the narco lifestyle with images of firearms and fighters in the jungle that appear to be very appealing for the youngest audiences. These posts also often come with the background music associated with the non-members, with the armed groups. And finally, what we have seen is also in this, like the posts you see in here, we have seen many interactions in the comments with non-members, and some of them express interest in joining. And this suggests that this type of content is serving as a recruitment tool on TikTok, at least. But we might wonder why all this, why these groups use and exploit digital technologies in this way. And I think Galen referred to many of these reasons. Of course, there is the intention to broadly communicate externally and recruit. For these groups, there is also the intention to represent themselves as a political option rather than just militant in nature. But for the younger audiences, what we have seen is a lot the use of this narco lifestyle as a better lifestyle for children. And how does all this facilitate recruitment of children? I think we can focus on two main points. And again, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. First one is the narco lifestyle suggesting a richer life. That's something we have read in many comments. And in terms of some individuals, even a better life. And so in this way, the recruited children, we have seen they become a recruitment tool with their reach and influence. And then there is the component of the online praise and virality, which strengthen the violent identities and normalize participation in armed conflict, particularly among adolescents seeking recognition, belonging, and purpose. And these 2 points bring to the point that visibility and popularity of this content portray fighting as normal and aspirational. And this could lead to the recruitment of more young people. Colombia is not the only ecosystem where we see this happening. Actually, I would like to thank Sandra because she shared this example with me of Sudan. And I look into it, there is a very interesting investigation done by Bellingcat. And here, the recruitment of children is even more systematic, if we can say that way. We have seen young boys recruited that they are widely referred as lion cubs. So there is a whole propaganda and branding of these young boys joining both rival groups in the ongoing conflict in Sudan. And very quickly, and I will share the link later, but during these investigations, Bellingcat flagged 12 TikTok accounts that had each posted viral content of child soldiers through the platform's internal reporting mechanism. It took a while for TikTok to take this account down, but eventually that happened. And in these videos, and again, you can read it in the report, there is also children in military uniforms posing with fighters and senior officials, all the way to footage with children who are actually armed. And very quickly in this slide, what I would like to stress is that oftentimes what we see, going back to also to what Galen shared, is that children are targeted online broadly because of the vulnerability they might have compared to other segment of the population and the easier ability to control them. And there are many ecosystems and platforms that can be exploited. Very quickly, here, this is connected to another research we did. This is an example from a screenshot from a Chen site. So Chen sites, you might know 4chan, 8chan. They are image-based board where you can post things anonymously. And these environments are very populated by young audiences, and that is absolutely fine. But the content there can be problematic, and you can find content from cybercrime all the way to some of the Galen mentioned references also to violent acts like mass shooting and school shooting. So I think that I'm just gonna stop here. I cover most that I wanted, and I hope it was interesting. And I'm happy to hear about any thoughts you have on the Colombia case study, but also if you know about any other examples of this phenomenon. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ottavia, and very interesting to see the context of Colombia. So now we will move to Vanessa Murphy. Vanessa is a legal advisor at the ICRC. She will tell us more about the legal implication of online recruitment and how the international law applies. Vanessa, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Sandra. I hope you can all see my slides. So very quickly to introduce, I work at the International Committee of the Red Cross, and one of the mandates of the International Committee of the Red Cross is to work for the promotion and better compliance with international humanitarian law, one component of which is rules regarding the recruitment and use of children. So the focus of my presentation today is on what international law says about the recruitment and use of children offline and equally online. So to do this, what I'd like to do briefly is just run through a couple of key concepts that define what is child recruitment and use in hostilities in armed conflict. Recall where the source of those laws comes from. So what are the international treaties that regulate these violations of international law? Give you the bottom line. So what does that mean states must do? So what must governments do in this respect? And then touch on a few developing recommendations we have as to measures that states must be taking to prevent child online recruitment and use in hostilities. So to start with key concepts, the basic definition of what child recruitment is it refers to the incorporation of a child into an armed force or an armed group, whether by compulsion, so that's often called conscription if it's a state armed force, or forced recruitment if it's an armed group, or on an alleged voluntary basis, so what looks like voluntary recruitment, but both are prohibited, both forced and alleged voluntary recruitment. And those definitions stem in particular from ICC, International Criminal Court case law. Unlawful use of a child in hostilities refers to the unlawful direct, active, or indirect use of a child in hostilities. And the law differs a little bit depending on what treaty applies, but to be clear, direct or active use looks like when a child is being used as a fighter, so to be part of the fight as a combatant using weapons, for example. And indirect use refers to when a child is being involved in, for example, acts such as intelligence gathering, potentially sabotage, or support for the conflict endeavor, slightly less directly involved in the actual fight. These are two distinct violations of international law. So recruitment is a violation, and then the use of a child is a separate violation. And why that's important is that sometimes a child might be a victim of one and not the other, but it doesn't matter. As soon as they've been used in hostilities, it doesn't matter if they're formally a part of the group. It's nevertheless still a violation of international law. Quickly, with regard to trends in how this has developed from an international legal perspective, you know, when we look at the case law, International Criminal Court case law, for example, typically it has looked like children who have been taken physical control of by an armed group, and often who've been put through some period of intense training, kinetic training, in things like how to conduct reconnaissance, how to use a weapon. And while many of the push and pull factors that attract a child to an armed group or pull a child towards an armed group are the same both offline and online. So, you know, Galen and Ottavia spoke about feelings of identity, feelings of community, but also potentially financial incentives. So these kind of stay the same, whether the recruitment is offline or online. But at the same time, online changes some aspects. So in particular, in the cases that we at the ICRC have been observing, recruitment can be more remote. So the armed group doesn't need obviously the same physical contact with the child. The child might become a part of the armed group without ever meeting a member. Less training, potentially. So instructions being given to children via, for example, Telegram channels or other social media platforms without actually training the child themselves. So just giving instructions and then the child being given potentially payment to conduct an act of sabotage or an attack. And of course, the fact that social media platforms can provide greater scale. So there's really an increase in the transnational scale of recruitment. The number of children that can be contacted or exposed to armed actors is increasing. The basic message in terms of how the law applies offline and online is that it applies protections that apply offline also apply online. So at times we hear from governments questions about whether the law is still fit for online activities, and the basic message is yes. So the law that prohibits child recruitment and use offline has the same prohibitive effect online. So up on the screen here are the key international legal treaties that prohibit child recruitment and use. We won't go through them in detail, but what I wanted to flag with regard to these treaties is two things. First of all, that if you are working in a particular context, it's important to look more specifically at which treaty applies. And that's because these treaties differ in standards in kind of three ways. The first is that sometimes they contain different lawful ages of recruitment, whether 15 or 18. The second is that they at times regulate different types of use of a child in hostilities. So sometimes they prohibit only direct use of a child in hostilities. Sometimes they also prohibit indirect use of a child in hostilities. And then the third point is that they sometimes apply differently to non-state armed groups. So how they regulate the behavior of non-state armed groups differs. Very quickly to run through them. The optional protocol on the protection of children in armed conflict is extremely widely ratified. It applies to 173 states. This prohibits, in particular for armed groups, for example, in Article 4, prohibits any recruitment and any use of a child in the jurisdiction of states parties. The additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions prohibit recruitment under the age of 15. They differently prohibit either direct or indirect use. The Rome Statute establishes recruitment and use as a war crime, so criminalizes it under the age of 15. The African Charter has a higher standard of 18, and then the ILO Convention also has this high standard of 18 for forced recruitment or use in hostilities. So if you're working in a particular context, important to look at which treaty obligations specifically apply to your state. The bottom line from all those treaties is that all states have at least one, if not two, if not three, international legal obligations to take active measures, to take all feasible measures to prevent recruitment and use of children in hostilities, including when related acts are facilitated online. And what that means is that if a state and government are failing to take any such measures that are effective, they may be violating the obligations they have to take feasible measures to prevent. So what that means, I think, for us as child practitioners is that there's law there to support our advocacy to state, to when we're working with government interlocutors to state, this is a legal obligation to take effective measures of prevention. It's not just good from a child protection perspective, it's also, in fact, your international legal obligation to do so. So to end on a couple of recommendations that the ICRC has, the first is really what I think both Ottavia and Galen have emphasized, which is that beginning prevention must start with the children themselves and with their caregivers. So warning and supporting and upskilling kids and their parents in order to be able to identify risks, but then also trying to ensure that there's that wider child protection safety net so that any of the push factors pushing them towards armed groups, such as financial incentives, are less powerful. So trying to ensure that they are equipped to resist armed groups. This can look like a few different things, and there's good practice measures, I think, being developed, including, for example, digital literacy programs in schools that highlight the types of ways that armed actors might be targeting kids through different platforms. Second, revisit but also apply existing national child recruitment law to prevent and prosecute online violations. Most states have some national law that prohibits recruitment and use of children. There are gaps sometimes, which means that it is not widely applicable enough. So sometimes those gaps should be plugged. But in particular, to just use the law that is there to investigate and prosecute cases of online recruitment. Third, including child recruitment and use online as a factor when digital law policy and budgetary allocations are being made at government level. So often online recruitment doesn't quite make it to the list of priorities that governments are considering when they're developing their digital laws or policies. Then regarding age restrictions and blocks on access or not. So when there is a very specific app, for example, developed in a conflict context, sometimes by governments who are using citizens to contribute, for example, pictures of adverse forces, so using citizens to gather intelligence on adversary forces' actions, it could be that participation in such applications can expose those civilians to harm in very specific circumstances, might consist of direct participation in hostility. So for specific apps, it might make sense to have a complete block on access. But at the same time, when we come to wider social media platforms, age restrictions and block on access become a lot more difficult to understand whether they will be effective. Caution and further research on this point is essentially one of the things that is another recommendation that should be invested in by governments. Such measures have prompted concern because they might be misused for over-restriction on children's freedom of speech. Any requirements that they entail to hand over personal data for the purpose of age restriction or blocks on access can also raise concerns. And then just simple efficacy, whether age restrictions and blocks on access really work when we're dealing with very tech-savvy Gen Zers who have VPNs. So all of that to say, another main recommendation is that, you know, in this emerging area, more research is needed on what works in terms of prevention, and that's something that we encourage governments and private actors, in particular the big tech companies, to invest in. Finally, and the final point is using global and regional multilateral fora to bring attention to this issue, to call for states to act more deliberately. So that's something that we are beginning to see, but needs further attention. Most recently, I think the current Human Rights Council session has a resolution on the rights of the child in armed conflict, which particularly calls attention to online child recruitment and calls on governments to take more action to prevent. So calling for more attention on the issue. Thanks. That's it from me, and back to you, Sandra. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you to all your work. So we're running a bit out of time, so I'm not sure we have that much time for the discussion, but I really encourage participants to ask questions through the Q&A box, and so that the panelists can directly respond to your question in case we don't have time. And now I will hand over to Kristin. Kristin is Political Affairs Officer at the Office of the Secretary General of the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. And this office has done some work on advocacy to prevent this kind of recruitment online. Kristin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. It's good to see everyone. As Sandra said, my name is Kristin, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the UN Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. It is really great to see the growing focus on this issue, as demonstrated not only by my co-panelists' amazing work, but also all of your interest in today's event. As mentioned, I'm here to speak about a specific advocacy initiative that our office has conducted on this issue. But I would like to start with a short example, which I think will resonate with you, especially after all the presentations you've already heard today. And it is a story that was shared by a young woman from Sudan who participated in our youth consultations that we held in 2023. And she told us about a friend of hers, a boy she knew, an adolescent who, as so many children and young people in Sudan, was deeply affected by the conflict raging around him. And he had experienced significant trauma, family loss, displacement, and was left with no access to education or a basic livelihood. So he felt hopeless, of course. And one of the few lifelines he had to stay connected was his mobile phone. And then one day he saw a video on social media. It was a short video of a boy similar to him in age, in military clothing. There was music playing in the background. There were friends cheering. Weapons were held high. And so the boy in the video seemingly was part of a community. He was protected. He had access to food. He had housing. And he looked excited. He even looked powerful. And despite clearly being a child, people were praising him online. They were calling him a hero and they were calling him a real man. And it was this video that was the entry point for our participants' friends' recruitment. So that story that was shared with us at the consultation stayed with many of us. It stays with me until today. And it was not the only example that we heard. Many of our participants expressed an urgent and important truth, which is that recruitment into conflict today doesn't only happen in villages, camps, or communities, it happens increasingly online. So I wanted to share a little bit about our work on this issue that we have conducted so far. As many of you probably know, at the Office of the Special Representative, we are focused on ending and preventing the 6 grave violations against children in armed conflict. And currently we do this across 23 situations globally. And over the past few years, we have seen a clear trend in line with what we've heard today, which is that threats for children in conflict are increasingly amplified online. Of course, children and young people are spending more time than ever before online, and the use of mobile technology and digital spaces, including social media, is growing exponentially. And that is especially true in Africa in light of its significant child and youth population, of course. And this can provide enormous opportunities, including for education and participation, but it also creates new pathways through which armed actors can reach and harm children. And often that happens beyond the visibility of communities, schools, or traditional protection actors. We are concerned especially about sexual violence and abduction in this regard, and then most prominently, of course, the recruitment and use of children. We do not routinely monitor this issue under our mandate, but we are receiving with increasing frequency now anecdotal reports from several situations under the mandate, and that includes Colombia, as we also heard in the previous presentation. It also includes Haiti, and we've received reports from Somalia and from Sudan as well. Now, of course, we live in a time of increasing pressure on protection budgets and capacities, so it is difficult to address an emerging challenge when we barely have the means to address the existing ones. But at our office in 2023, we were incredibly lucky. We received funding from the United Nations Peace and Development Trust Fund for a pilot initiative on digital risks for conflict-affected children that we conducted as part of our regional partnerships work with a focus on Africa. And it was thanks to this funding that we were able to partner with the African Union Youth Envoy to first consult with young people across Africa on this issue. We held 2 live consultations And we also conducted an online survey. And overall, we heard from over 200 young people across Africa. And we asked them about their online habits, including their preferred platforms. We asked about the risks and harms they see online. And we collected their views on countermeasures. And we also invited them to co-design with us a continental campaign. And the participants expressed severe concerns over several issues, including misinformation, hate speech, sexual violence, misuse of digital platforms to mobilize violence, spread extremist narratives, and importantly, the recruitment issue as well. The participants noted that social media and messaging platforms, including private messaging platforms, are being misused to glorify armed groups, to romanticize combat, to spread harmful gender narratives, especially masculinity narratives, and to create a false sense of belonging, identity, or protection of community, which of course can resonate with vulnerable children and draw them into violence. And all of that happens while hiding the devastating consequences of war. And the troubling reality is that these strategies can reach children anywhere, anytime, simply through a device in their pocket. And the consultations also importantly revealed that young people want to be part of the solution, and they gave us concrete recommendations. And they also provided concrete ideas on the key messages, the design and rollout of our advocacy. And based on this, our office developed a social media campaign with counter messages that was distributed across Africa and beyond. It focused on several key objectives, raising awareness about these tactics, informing children and young people about their rights, promoting safe digital behavior, and also highlighting the positive role of children and youth in peace and security. It uses short videos and social media cards that are designed specifically for platforms where young people spend their time, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We launched it in February 2024, so a bit more than 2 years ago now, in 3 languages, Arabic, English, and French. And through targeted ads, we made sure to reach the right age groups in conflict-affected settings across Africa. In the first 3 months of the campaign rollout alone, we reached over 14 million children and young people across Africa. And subsequently, the campaign was also presented at global events, including at the 2024 Summit of the Future in New York, where it was featured as an innovation initiative in the UN system. And good news, it remains available. I would encourage all of you to make use of it, to help us disseminate it. I will upload it in the community of practice after this event, and happy to answer any questions on it. Briefly, what are the next steps from our end? This issue is of high importance to our office and also to the special representative personally. We continue our advocacy, we continue to collect information, and we have also begun direct discussions with the social media platforms. We have also applied for additional funding on this issue to conduct consultations with experts, develop policy recommendations and practical solutions specifically under the CAAC mandate, and also to work with young people to build their digital literacy, which was one of their main asks at our consultation. Couple of recommendations I can leave you with from our end, and I think that they're very much in line with my colleagues' recommendations as well. We need stronger engagement with the private sector, especially the social media companies. We need to build digital literacy as a protection tool. We also need to support youth-led initiatives and civil society on this specific issue. We need to strengthen research and data collection. And finally, we must ensure that the protection of conflict-affected children is central to global discussions on digital governance and emerging technologies. So In closing, I think we all agree that protecting children in the digital age will require innovation and sustained commitment and strong partnerships. I'm really grateful to the organizers for today's event and to all of you for your time. And I would like to leave you with a short video that was at the heart of our campaign and is inspired by the ideas shared by our participants.
Yeah, thank you, Kristin. Unfortunately, I think we're a bit short on time for the video, but Pedro just dropped the link.
Okay,
so
then
people can
watch it on your own time.
Yes. Okay, sorry about that. I knew it was a bit ambitious to have 4 experts today. Unfortunately, we don't have time now for question and answer, but the panelists can still answer your question in the Q&A, and we will also continue the conversation in the committee of practice. As Kristin mentioned, all the panelists will be on the committee of practice. We will also drop the link if you want to register, if you haven't so yet done yet. And I just want to give the floor to Afroz Kaviani Johnson from UNICEF. She's a child protection specialist and she leads efforts to protect children online, for a few closing remarks.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I know that our time is short, so let me keep it very brief. Just really to emphasize how valuable this discussion has been. It's really reinforced what all of us are seeing in our respective areas of work, how digital technologies are fundamentally changing the ways in which children are targeted, groomed, recruited, and maybe also, just to emphasize, because it hasn't come out so strongly, but also used by armed groups. These aren't entirely new risks, but the scale, speed, and anonymity that online platforms provide are creating conditions that we simply haven't had to confront before. I really want to also reinforce the point that did come out, that online recruitment doesn't replace those offline dynamics that we already know so well. As highlighted, it's amplifying, intensifying those vulnerabilities that children already face, and it has become one additional tool at the disposal of armed actors. So at UNICEF, we've spent years building our child online protection work, mainly around sexual exploitation, cyberbullying, and harmful content. But at both country and global levels, we're really adapting that same strategic approach to the challenge of online recruitment. And I think just another point out to what Galen mentioned around those hybrid and simultaneous harms as well. A few things came out really clearly today. I'll make it even more succinct than I was planning to. But as reinforced by Vanessa, governments have a central role to play, including through criminalising child recruitment, including when that happens through digital technologies. There's also that role to play in regulating platforms to prevent and detect this activity. I want to call out the industry responsibility. Child rights must be embedded across digital business practices and activities in line with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And UNICEF encourages and calls for companies to include robust disclosure on child rights impacts, including measures to address child recruitment in their regular reporting, including transparency reports. And of course, we've discussed what's needed at the family and community levels. So for our part, we'll continue contributing in several ways. Together with partners, we'll continue to strengthen the evidence base, press for action on policy and regulatory gaps, and sustain our work with and on industry to drive stronger protections and accountability. Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Sandra.
Thank you, Pedro. Yes, thank you, Afroz. I was just saying that this summarized well all the contributions we had today. And very pleased to see there is already a wealth of expertise that is out there that is documenting what's happening, and then you can learn more from these experts and the research that they've done. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you again to all our panelists and experts. We have a short poll if you want to take 1 minute to answer how you found this webinar, if you've learned anything, hopefully today. And I wish you a good rest of your day to all of you. Again, we will continue the conversation on the Committee of Practice. I know there is some pending questions, particularly for Vanessa. We will continue the conversation answering them in the Committee of Practice.